the first strong nuptial imagery that we get in the Gospel of John related to Jesus is, of course, the marriage at Cana, which is obviously a nuptial situation. But I want to point out just a few basic facts about the way the marriage at Cana is described in the Gospel of John. You see in John chapter 2, verse 1, on the third day there was a marriage at Cana in Galilee. Let's stop there for just one moment. It says on the third day. Now, the third day from what? Okay, what's being counted here? Okay, to find out the third day from what, we got to back up into chapter 1, and we have to really backtrack to the beginning of the gospel itself. So if we backed up into chapter 1, we go back up, and the first time reference we find working backwards is verse 43, where it says the next day. Okay. Well, the next day from what? Okay, well, we got to back up further. When we go up to verse 35, we find the next day. Okay, next day from what? Well, we back up further. We get up to verse 29, we find the next day. If we back up from verse 29, we have no other indications of time previous. Okay, so now let's run through this in chronological order now, starting from chapter 1 moving down. Apparently, the first stuff that happens in history in John is in verse 19 when it starts talking about John the Baptist talking with the Jews who come down to ask who he is. And it narrates all that, and that apparently is the first day of the gospel, okay, the way the gospel narrates. So that would be verses 19 through 28, okay? So then when we hit verse 29, all of a sudden it's the next day. So that then would be day 2. And the events from verses 29 through 34 would be day 2. And then verse 35, the next day, that puts us into day 3. Okay. Those events down to verse 43. Verse 43 says the next day, so now what day is it? Day 4. Okay. Go all the way down. The next time indicator we get is chapter 2, verse 1, on the third day. So, the third day from what? The third day from the fourth day. So you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay? It brings us to the Sabbath of this gospel. Okay? The seventh day that's narrated in this gospel. Is that of any significance? Well, think about the talk we had earlier, talking about the so-called two creation narratives, which really need to be read as one, right? Adam created on the sixth day, falls into sleep. Eve made from his side. He wakes up. That would be the morning of the seventh day. That's when you have this wedding of the first Adam and Eve, okay, the first human pair, okay, in the creation story. Now, what do we have in the Gospel? Is there any links to Genesis? Say even Genesis chapter 1 in the Gospel of John? Are there any subtle clues that he's telling a story that's somehow related to the creation story? Like maybe starting off the book with, in the beginning. Okay. And then talk about all things being made. And then talk about light and darkness, created on the first day. Okay. That's all in the prologue of the Gospel of John. All this language taken from the creation story in Genesis. What is the whole point of that? Okay. Jesus is our new creation. Okay. When you come to Jesus, it's such a moving experience. It's like being made new. Being made all over. And this is an idea that the Apostle John pursues elsewhere in the Gospel of John. Like in John chapter 9, where a man who was born blind in darkness, okay, plunges himself into water at the pool of Siloam and comes back and can see what? Light, okay, which is a type of baptism, and baptism is a type of the new creation. Because how is the world made? Began with the Spirit moving over the waters. And then the dry land was brought up out of the water. So when we are plunged into the baptismal font and brought back up, and that's the fullest sign of baptism is immersion, like practiced in the ancient church, sometimes still practiced today. Okay, that's the fullness of the sign. You're brought up out of the waters. You are like the dry land being created for the first time. You are a new creation. So that's why St. Paul says, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. So what's the Gospel of John presenting us with? It's the 7 days of the new creation. And on the 7th day of the first creation, we had the new man and the new woman come forward. Now, not coincidentally, on the 7th day of the new creation, the Gospel of John, we have a wedding, and the only identified characters in the story are Jesus and his mother. It's the only named persons. Now, it is not the marriage of Jesus. It's not the marriage of our Blessed Mother, okay? Yet it is a marriage context, and to the front of this context, in the front of this marriage, we have Jesus, who does something that is the prerogative of the bridegroom. You know what he does in this story that was really the right of the bridegroom to do, or the duty of the bridegroom to do? What? Provide the wine, okay? And yet, the bridegroom at this wedding, who remains unnamed in the background, he's not so good at that, okay? He's not so good at fulfilling his bridegroomial duties. That's an adjective I came up with myself. If anybody knows of a legitimate word that means that, let me know. But I've always been forced to use bridegroomial. Anyway, Jesus takes on those bridegroomial prerogatives and provides the wine. So what's being shown here? Jesus is new Adam to marry new Eve, okay, new mother of the living. All right, they come to the front, and Mary is a type of the bridegroom, the church, and Christ here is the bridegroom. Okay, he's the bridegroom of what scholars call the eschatological wedding banquet. Okay, the final wedding banquet of the last days when we're face to face with God, because Jesus he is God Himself. When we look upon Him, we see the Father. Okay, so it's the marriage feast of the last times. Okay, so that's where the nuptial imagery begins in the Gospel of John, really at the wedding at Cana, where Jesus and Mary come forward as kind of the new Adam and the new Eve, new bridegroom, new type of the bride in John 2.